Geirlaug, the king's daughter. One day, a powerful king and his beautiful wife were sitting in the gardens of their capital city, talking earnestly about the future life of their little son, who was sleeping by their side in his beautiful golden cradle. They had been married for many years without children, so when this baby came, they thought themselves to be the happiest couple in the world. He was a fine, sturdy little boy who loved to kick and to strike out with his fists. But even if he had been weak and small, they would have still thought him the most wonderful creature upon the earth, and were so absorbed they were making plans for him that they never noticed a huge dark shadow creeping up, with a horrible head and gleaming teeth stretching over them. And in an instant, their beloved baby was snatched away. For a while, the king and queen remained where they were, speechless with horror. Then the king rose slowly, and holding out his hand to his wife, led her weeping into the palace, and for many days their subjects saw them no more. Meanwhile, the dragon soared high into the air, holding the cradle between his teeth, and the baby slept on. He flew so fast that he would soon cross the borders of another kingdom, and again he beheld the king and queen of the country seated in the garden with a little baby girl lying in a wonderful cradle of white satin and lace. Swooping down from behind, as he had done before, he was just about to seize the cradle, when the king jumped up and dealt him such a blow with his golden staff that the dragon had not only started back, but in his pain let fall the boy as he spread his wings and soared into the air to escape from the danger. That was a narrow escape, said the king, turning to his wife, who sat pale and with fright, and clasped her baby tightly in her arms. "Frightful," murmured the queen. "But look, what is that glittering object that is flying out there?" The king walked in the direction of the finger, and, to his astonishment, beheld another cradle and another baby. "Ah, the monster must have stolen this from as he thought to steal Geirlaug," he cried. Stooping lower, he read some words that were written on the fine linen that was wound around the boy. "This is Grethari, son of Gethari the king." Unfortunately, it happened that the two neighboring monarchs had had a serious quarrel, and for some years had ceased holding communications with each other. So instead of sending a messenger at once to Grethari to tell him of the safety of his son, the king contented himself with adopting the baby, which was brought up with Geirlaug the princess. For a while things went well with the children, who were as happy as the day was long. But at last there came a time when the queen could run no more races or to play hide-and-seek with him in the garden, as she was fond of doing, but lay stretched out from a pile of soft cushions. By and by she gave up even doing that, and the people in the palace spoke with low voices, and even Geirlaug and Grethari trod gently and moved quietly as they drew near her room. At length, one morning, they were sent for by the king himself, who, his eyes red with weeping, told him that the queen was dead. Great was the sorrow of the two children, for they had loved the queen very dearly, and life seemed dull without her. But the lady-in-waiting who took care of them in the tower, which had been built for them while they were still babies, was kind and good, and when the king was busy or away in other parts of the kingdom, she made them quite happy, and saw that they were taught everything that a prince and princess ought to know. Thus the 2 or 3 years passed, and one day, as the children were anxiously awaiting their father's return from the distant city, there rode past haste into the courtyard of the palace a herald whom the king had sent before him, to say that he was bringing back a new wife. Now, in itself, there is nothing very strange or dreadful in the fact that the king should marry again. But, as the old lady-in-waiting soon guessed, the queen, in spite of her beauty, was a witch, and it was easy to see that she was jealous of everyone who might gain power over her husband, and that boded ill for Geirlaug and Grethari. The faithful woman could not sleep for thinking about her charges, and her soul sank when, a few months after the marriage, war broke out in the country across the seas, and the king rode away to lead his troops. Then there happened what she had so long expected. One night, unlike her usual habit, she was sleeping soundly. Afterwards, she felt sure that a drug had been put into her food. The witch came to the tower. Exactly what she did there, no one knew. But when the sun rose, the beds of Grothari and Geirlaug were empty. At dawn, the queen summoned some of her guards and told them that she had been warned in a dream that some evil fate would befall her through a wild beast, and bade them to go and kill every animal within 2 miles of the palace. But the only beasts they found were 2 black foals of wondrous beauty, fitted for the king's riding. It seemed a pity to kill them, for what harm could 2 little foals do anyone? So they let them run away, frisking over the plain and returning to the palace.
"Did you see nothing? Really nothing?"
Asked the queen when they had again appeared before her. Nothing, your majesty," she replied. But the queen did not believe them, and when they were gone she gave orders to her steward that a supply of guards should be plied with strong drink so that their tongues would be loosened, and further that he was to give heed to their babble and report to her whatever they might let fall. "Your Majesty's commands have been obeyed," said the steward, when late in the evening he begged admittance to the royal apartments. "But after all, the men have told you the truth. I listened to their talk from the beginning to end, and nothing did they see save for 2 black foals." He might have added more, but the look of the queen's blazing eyes terrified him, and bowing hastily, he backed out of her presence. In a week's time the king came home, and right glad were all the courtiers to see him. "Now perhaps you will find someone else to scream at," whispered they among themselves. She was the queen, who had vented her rage on her attendants during these days, and though what happened to make her so angry, nobody knew. But whatever might be the meaning of this, things were sure to improve when the king were there to rule the palace instead of his wife. Unfortunately, the joy only lasted a short while. For the very first night after the king's arrival, the queen related the evil dream she had dreamt in his absence, and begged him to go out to the next morning and kill every living creature he saw within 2 miles of the city. The king, who always believed everything the queen said, promised to do as she wished. But before he had ridden through the lovely gardens that surrounded the palace, he was attracted by 2 little singing bluebirds perched in the scarlet-bellied holly, which made him think of every beautiful thing he had ever heard of or imagined. Hour after hour passed by, and still the birds sang, and still the king listened, though of course he had never guessed that it was Geirlaug and Grothari, whose notes filled him with enchantment. At length darkness fell, and the birds' voices were hushed, and the king awoke with a start to find that the day of his promise to the queen could not be kept.
"Well, did you see anything?"
She asked eagerly when the king entered her apartments. My dear, I'm most ashamed to confess to you, but the fact is that before I rode far between the western gates, the singing of 2 strange little bluebirds made me forget all else in the world, and you will hardly believe it, but not until the dark grew did I remember where I was and what I should have been doing. However, tomorrow nothing shall hinder me from fulfilling your desires."
"There will be no tomorrow,"
muttered the queen as she turned away with a curious glitter in her eyes. But the king did not hear her. That night the king gave a great supper in the palace in honor of the victory he had gained over the enemy, and 3 men whom the queen had sent forth to slay the wild beasts held positions of trust in the household, for to them was committed a custody of the queen's person. And on the occasion of the feast, their places were always next to the king, so it was easy for the queen to scatter a slow and fatal poison in their cups without anyone being the wiser. Before dawn, the palace was roused by the news that the king was dead, and that the 3 officers of the guards were dying also. Of course, nobody's cries of lament were as loud as those of the queen, but when once the splendid funeral was over, she gave out that she was going to shut herself up into a distant castle till the year of her mourning was over, and after appointing a regent to the kingdom, she set out attended only by a maid who knew all of her secrets. Once she had left the palace, she quickly began to work her spells to discover under what form Geirlaug and Githari lay hidden. Happily, the princess had studied magic under a former governess, and was able to fathom her stepmother's wicked plot, and hastily changed herself into a whale, and her foster brother into its fin. The queen took the shape of a shark and gave chase. For several hours a fierce battle raged between the whale and the shark, and the sea round was red with blood. First one of the combatants got the better, then the other, but at length it became plain to the crowd that the little fishes gathered around to watch that the victory would be to the whale. And so it was. But when, after a mighty struggle, the shark floated dead and harmless on the surface of the water, the whale was so exhausted that she had only the strength enough to drag her wounded body into a quiet little bay, and for 3 days she remained there still and as motionless as if she had been dead herself. At the end of the 3 days, her wounds were healed, and she began to think of what was best to do. "Let us go back to our father's kingdom," she said to Githari, when they had both resumed their proper shapes and were sitting on a high cliff above the sea. "How clever you are! I never should have thought of that," answered Githari, who, in truth, was not clever at all. But Geirlaug took a small box of white powder from her dress and sprinkled some over him and some over herself, and quicker than lightning they found themselves in the palace grounds from which Garathi had been carried off by the dragon so many years before. "Now, take up the band with the gold letters and bind it around your forehead," said Geirlaug, "and go boldly into the castle, and remember, however great may be your thirst, you must drink nothing till you have spoken to your father. If you do, it will befall us both." "Why should I be thirsty?" replied Githari, staring at her in astonishment. "It will not take me 5 minutes to reach the castle gate." Geirlaug held her peace, but her eyes had them a sad look. "Goodbye," she said at last, and she turned and kissed him. Githari had spoken truly when he declared that he could easily get to the castle in 5 minutes. At least, no one would have dreamed that it would take any possible longer. But to his surprise, the door, which stood open widely so they could see the color of the hangings within, never appeared to grow nearer, while each moment the sun burned more hotly, and his tongue was parched with thirst. "I don't understand. What can be the matter with me? And why haven't I reached the castle long ago?" he murmured to himself as his knees began to lock under him with fatigue, and his head to swim. For a few more paces he staggered on blindly, when suddenly the sound of rushing waters smote upon his ears, and in a little wood that bordered the path they beheld a stream falling over a rock. At this sight his promise to Geirlaug was forgotten. Fighting his way through the brambles that tore his clothes, he cast himself down beside the fountain, and seizing the golden cup that hung from a tree, he drank the draught deeply. When he rose up, the remembrance of Geirlaug and of his past life had vanished, and instead something stirred dimly within him, the vision of a white-haired man and woman who stood in the open door with outstretched hands. "Githari, Githari, you've come home at last!" For 3 hours Geirlaug waited in the spot where Githari had left her, and then she began to understand what had happened. Her heart was heavy, but she soon made up her mind what to do, and pushing her way out of the wood, she skirted the high wall that enclosed the royal park and gardens, till she reached a small house where the forester lived with his 2 daughters. "Do you want to go to sweep and to milk the cows?" asked she, when one of the sisters answered her knock. "Yes, we do, very badly.
And you look strong and clean. We will take you for a servant if you would like to come,
replied the young woman.
But first, what is your name?
Lopherthera, said Geirlaug quickly, for she did not wish anyone to know who she was, and following her new mistress into the house, she begged to be taught her work without delay. And so clever was she that by and by it began to be noised abroad that the strange girl had come to live in the forester's house, had not her equal in the whole kingdom for skill as well as beauty. Thus the years slipped away, during which Geirlaug grew into a woman. Now and then she caught glimpses of Grithari as he rode out to hunt in the forest, but when she saw him coming she hid herself behind a great tree, for her heart was still sore at his forgetfulness. One day, however, when she was gathering herbs, he came upon her suddenly, before she had time to escape, though as she had stained her face and hands brown, and covered her beautiful hair with a scarlet cap, he did not guess her to be his foster sister. "What is your name, pretty maiden?" asked he.
Lafertha,
answered the girl with a low curtsy.
Ah, it is you, then,
"Of whom I had heard so much," he said. "You are too beautiful to spend your life serving a forester's daughters.
Come with me to the palace, and my mother the queen will make you one of her ladies in waiting." "Truly, that would be a great fortune," answered the maiden, "and if you really mean it, I will go with you. But how shall I know that you are not jesting?"
"Give me something to do for you, and I will do it, whatever it is," cried the young man eagerly. And she cast her eyes down and answered,
"Go to the stable and bind the calf that is there, so that it shall not break loose in the night and wander away. For the forester and his daughters have treated me well, and I would not leave them without my work still undone."
So Grithari set out to the stable where the calf stood, and wound the rope around its horns. But when he had made it fast to the wall, he found that the coil of the rope had twisted itself around his wrist, and pull as he might, he could not get free. All night he wriggled and struggled till he was half dead with fatigue. But when the sun rose, the rope suddenly fell away, and, very angry with the maiden, he dragged himself to the palace. "She is a witch," he muttered crossly to himself, "and I will have no more to do with her." And he flung himself on his bed and slept all day. Not long after this adventure, the king and queen sent for their beloved son to be an embassy to a neighboring country to seek a bride from amongst 7 princesses. The most beautiful of all was, of course, the one chosen, and the young pair took ship without delay for the kingdom of the prince's parents. The wind was fair, and the vessel was so swift that, in less time than he could have expected, the harbor nearest the castle was reached. A splendid carriage had been left in readiness close to the beach, but no horses were to be found, for everyone had been carried off to take part in a great review which the king was to hold on the day of honor of his son's marriage.
"I can't stay here all day," said the princess crossly when Githari told her of the plight they were in. "I'm perfectly worn out as it is, and you will have to find something to draw the carriage, if it is only a donkey. If you don't, I will go back straight to my father."
Poor Grithari was much troubled by the words of the princess. Not that he felt so much in love with her, for during the voyage he had not shown herself several times in vain in how bad-tempered she was. But a prince and a bridegroom, he could not, of course, bear to think that any slight would be put upon her. So he hastily bade his attendants to go in search of some animal and bring it back at once, at which they were waiting. During the long pause, the princess sat in her beautiful gold coach with her blue velvet mantle covered with silver bees drawn round her, so that not even the tip of her nose could be seen. At length the girl appeared driving a young ox in front of her, followed by one of the prince's messengers, who was talking eagerly.
"Will you lend me your ox, fair maiden?" asked Grithari, jumping up and going to meet them. "You shall fix your own price, and it shall be paid unbegrudgingly, for never before the king's son in such a plight." "My price is seats for me and my 2 friends behind you and your bride at the wedding feast," answered she,
and to this Grithari joyfully consented. 6 horses would not have drawn the coach at the speed of this one ox. Trees and fields flew by so fast that the bride became quite giddy, and, as expected, besides, they would be upset at any moment. But in spite of her fears, nothing happened, and they drew up in safety at the door of the palace, to the great surprise of the king and queen. The marriage preparations were hurried on, and by the end of the week, everything was ready. It was perhaps fortunate that the princess was too busy with her clothes and her jewels during this period to pay much heed to Grithari, so that by the time the wedding day came round, he had almost forgotten how cross and rude she had been on the journey. The oldest men and women in the town agreed that nothing so splendid had ever been seen at the bridal procession to the great hall, where the banquet was to be held, before the ceremony was celebrated in the palace. The princess was in high good humor, feeling that all eyes were upon her, and bowed and smiled right and left. Taking the prince's hand, she sailed proudly down the room, where the guests were readily assembled, to her place at the head of the table by the side of the bridegroom. As she did so, three strange ladies in shining dresses of blue, green, and red glided in and seated themselves on the vacant bench immediately behind the young couple. The red lady was Geirlaug, who had brought with her the foster's daughters. In one hand she held a wand of birch bark, in the other a closed basket. Silently they sat as the feast proceeded. Hardly anyone noticed their presence, or if they did, supposed them to be attendants of the future queen. Suddenly, when the merriment was at its height, Geirlaug opened the basket, and out flew a cock and hen. To the astonishment of everyone, the bird circled about in front of the royal pair, the cock plucking the feathers out of the tail of the hen, who tried in vain to escape from him. "Why do you treat me as badly as Grithari treated Geirlaug?" cried the hen at last. And Grithari heard, and started up wildly. In an instant, all the past rushed to him. The princess by his side was forgotten, and he only saw the face of the child with whom he had played with long years ago. "Where is Geirlaug?" he exclaimed, looking about the hall, and his eyes fell upon the strange lady. With a smile she held out a ring which he had given her on her 12th birthday, when they were still children, without a thought of the future. "You and none other shall be my wife," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the middle of the company. It is not easy to describe the scene that followed. Of course, nobody understood what had actually happened, and the king and queen imagined that their son had suddenly gone mad. As for the princess, her rage and fury was beyond belief, and the guests left the hall as quickly as they could, so that the royal family might arrange their own affairs. And in the end it was settled that half the kingdom must be given to the despised princess instead of a husband. And she sailed back at once to her country, where she soon betrothed to a young noble, and in reality she liked much better than Grithari. That evening Grithari was married to Geirlaug, and they lived happily until they died. It made all their people happy.